Millionaire CEO needs fake girlfriend to annoy his ex at his friend's wedding. Everyone is shocked by her. He paid her $2,500 to pretend to be his girlfriend just to make his ex jealous at a destination wedding. Cold, calculated, perfect, until things got real. She wasn't supposed to matter. He wasn't supposed to fall. But one overheard conversation shattered everything. What started as a performance spiraled into heartbreak, regret, and the kind of love you don't see coming. Will she forgive him? Or will his biggest mistake cost him the only woman he didn't plan for? Stay with us. This story is about revenge, redemption, and a second chance that might just be real. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. $2,000 for one evening of your time, Miss Green. Nothing romantic unless, of course. Lucas Reed let the words trail off with a sly smirk, the kind that suggested this was no ordinary business arrangement. Annie Green, a freelance personal assistant based in Chicago, felt a subtle jolt in her chest. Still, she kept her smile steady, the same composed expression she wore on every Zoom call. Lucas looked calm, confident. That clean-cut blonde hair, crisp white shirt, and the city skyline glowing behind him, he was every bit the high-powered creative director she'd heard about. But Annie couldn't ignore the way his words lit a spark of uncertainty. Outside her small apartment, the last of the afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains. Her workspace was tidy except for one thing, a course registration form for a fast-track project management program. Tuition due, no discounts, and no way she could afford it, unless something unexpected came along. And this offer from Lucas Unexpected was putting it lightly. Across town in a high-rise corner office, Lucas sat leaning back in a sleek leather chair. On his glass desk, a silver wedding invitation lay open like a cruel joke. Isabel and Daniel, June, Santorini, Greece. Daniel, his childhood friend. Isabel, his ex. The woman who had once been everything until she vanished into the arms of a real estate mogul nearly twice Lucas's age. That breakup had carved a scar into him that hadn't quite faded. And now with the wedding on the horizon, that scar pulsed fresh again. Lucas knew they'd be there, smiling, flaunting their perfect happiness, their upgraded lives, and he refused to show up looking bitter and alone. No, he needed to make a statement. Not with a model, not with someone flashy or predictable. He needed someone different, smart, subtle, the kind of woman who made people curious. And that's when her name came to him, Annie Green. They had only worked together on small contracts, emails, virtual meetings, brief exchanges. But Annie had always struck him as sharp, professional, and quietly witty. The more he thought about it, the more he knew she was exactly what he needed. And so he made the call. Annie didn't reply to Lucas's email right away. She read it 3 times sitting on her worn couch with a lukewarm cup of tea in hand. A personal appearance at a social event, he wrote. A need to make a certain impression. Discretion and poise required. The message was vague, but the number at the bottom, $2,000 for a single night, was very clear. Annie had always been careful with her freelance work. She didn't take odd gigs. She didn't mix business with anything even remotely personal. But tuition was due in 2 weeks. Rent wasn't far behind. So after 2 days of thinking, rereading, and Googling Lucas Reed's scandal just to be safe, she finally responded. If this is a legitimate offer, I'm willing to discuss the details in person. They met that Friday afternoon in a quiet little cafe tucked into the corner of Logan Square. The place smelled like cinnamon and old books, and it was the kind of spot that made first meetings feel less awkward. Annie arrived first, hair down for once, tucked neatly behind one ear. She wore a simple navy blouse and dark jeans, professional enough to keep control, casual enough to feel human. Lucas walked in 10 minutes later, looking less like a corporate executive and more like someone trying not to draw attention. But he still couldn't hide the expensive watch or the way people glanced up when he passed. Annie, he greeted, smiling. Thanks for coming. Curiosity got the better of me, she said with a small shrug. Lucas got straight to the point. He explained the wedding, the ex, the public setting, the need for a +1 who could keep up in conversation, play the role convincingly, and above all, appear real. I'm not looking for someone to pretend to be a supermodel, he said. I want substance. Someone people will remember, not just stare at. Annie listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she leaned back slightly, folding her arms. So basically, you want me to be your PR stunt, she asked. Lucas winced. I wouldn't put it that way. How would you put it then? He paused, choosing his words more carefully. I want someone who makes it look like I've moved on. Grown up. Like I don't need to win because I already have. Annie raised an eyebrow. And this is worth $2,000 to you. Actually, he said, I'll make it $2,500. If you say yes right now. There was a beat of silence. Then Annie smiled faintly. All right, Mr. Reed, she said. You've got yourself a fake girlfriend. Santorini was just as beautiful as the photos, maybe more. The sky was that kind of blue that didn't seem real. And when the sun dipped toward the sea, everything turned gold. Annie had never been anywhere like it. Cobblestone streets, bright white villas clinging to cliffsides, wind that smelled like salt and citrus. It was magical and also just slightly intimidating. She wasn't used to this kind of luxury. Flying first class, staying in a private villa overlooking the Aegean, wearing borrowed designer dresses. But Lucas made it all seem normal. Like this was just another day in his life. When he picked her up at her door that morning in Chicago, he didn't say much, just helped with her bag, and asked if she preferred coffee or tea on the plane. But now, as they walked into the wedding rehearsal dinner arm in arm, it wasn't silence anymore. They laughed. They whispered. They looked like a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other, not in a desperate, showy way, but in the quiet, magnetic way that made people watch. Annie had chosen a simple emerald green dress for the evening. Nothing flashy, but the way it hugged her figure and shimmered in the light made people turn their heads. Lucas noticed too. You clean up well, he murmured as they approached the reception area. I hope that's not surprise in your voice, Annie teased, barely glancing his way. He smiled, then leaned in slightly. Only a little. The dinner was hosted in a candlelit courtyard, with soft music playing and laughter drifting into the night air. Most of the guests were old money types, bankers, developers, artists with connections. Lucas knew almost everyone. Annie knew no one, but she held her own. She talked to a gallery owner about sustainability and modern art. She chatted with the groom's cousin about Greek mythology. She didn't pretend to be anything she wasn't, but she listened, asked good questions, and carried herself with confidence. Lucas watched her from across the table as she spoke. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed. The way she met people's eyes when they talked. The way she made everything feel easy. And then, of course, Isabel showed up. She entered like she owned the place, tall, radiant, in a silk dress that shimmered like water. On her arm was Thomas Edivane, the hotel tycoon. He was older, taller, and clearly used to being stared at. They didn't see Lucas and Annie right away. But eventually, Isabel's gaze shifted across the table and froze. Her expression didn't change much. Just a slight tightening of the mouth. A flicker of surprise in her eyes. Her gaze dropped to Annie, then back to Lucas. Lucas just smiled politely and raised his glass in acknowledgement. Annie leaned in a little. Is that her? She whispered, her lips barely moving. He nodded. She looks dramatic. Lucas smirked. That's generous. The rest of the night went smoothly. Isabel kept her distance, but Annie noticed her watching. More than once. Sometimes when she and Lucas laughed too hard. Sometimes when Annie reached for his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, which weirdly, it was starting to feel like. By the time dessert was served, Lucas leaned over and whispered, "I owe you big time." Annie tilted her head. "For what?" "For saving my dignity and looking this good while doing it." She smiled a little softer now. "You're welcome." The next morning the island was quiet. Annie stood on the villa's balcony with a mug of hot coffee, watching the sea glisten under the early sunlight. Below the town was just beginning to stir fishermen untangling nets, bells ringing softly in the distance, the smell of bread drifting up from a nearby cafe. It should have felt like a vacation. But inside something was shifting. She wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But there was a weight in her chest that hadn't been there before. Last night, it had felt too real. The way Lucas looked at her when she laughed. The warmth in his voice when he introduced her to someone. The way he had lightly placed his hand on the small of her back, not as part of the act, but like he meant it. And worst of all, the way she liked it. Lucas wasn't just charming. He was attentive, gentle, and surprisingly funny when he let his guard down. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Hey!" his voice called from behind her. Annie turned to find him leaning on the doorframe, barefoot, still tousled from sleep, holding his own coffee. "Morning," she said, shifting her weight. He stepped outside and joined her, looking out over the ocean for a moment before speaking. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just taking it all in." Lucas glanced at her, studying her face. "You were amazing last night," he said quietly. "Everyone loved you." Annie shrugged. "I've been practicing my fake charm." He smiled at that, then looked down at his mug. "You know, it didn't feel fake." Silence stretched between them, soft and full of meaning. Annie opened her mouth to reply, but stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. And just like that, the ground between them shifted. Later that afternoon, they strolled through the narrow alleys of Oya, browsing through handmade jewelry and watercolor paintings. Tourists bustled around them, but the two walked slowly as if time had started to move differently. At one point, Lucas stopped in front of a small shop window displaying vintage books in Greek and English. "I haven't read for fun in years," he said. Annie gave him a playful look. "How tragic." "I'm serious," he said. "Work took over everything. I forgot what it was like to just slow down." She nudged him gently. "You remember now?" Lucas looked at her. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to." That night at the actual wedding ceremony, things changed even more. The sky turned lavender as the couple exchanged vows on a terrace overlooking the sea. Candles flickered, string lights swayed in the breeze, and soft music played as the sun disappeared. Lucas reached for Annie's hand and didn't let go. He didn't have to. She didn't pull away. When Isabel approached their table later, all dressed up and dripping in diamonds, the tension could be cut with a knife. "Lucas," she said smoothly, "you look, relaxed." "I am," he said calmly. "Isabel, this is Annie." Isabel turned her gaze to Annie, a tight smile on her lips. "So you're the one keeping him company." Annie smiled, unbothered. "Actually, he's keeping me company." Isabel blinked, caught off guard by the quiet confidence. Lucas squeezed Annie's hand under the table, and for the first time since this all began, he didn't care what Isabel thought. Not even a little. Because as he looked at Annie, her warmth, her wit, her ease, he realized something dangerous. He didn't want this to end when the wedding did. The morning after the wedding, everything felt different. Lucas and Annie had breakfast on the terrace in near silence. But it wasn't the awkward kind, it was quiet content. The kind of silence that only comes when two people are comfortable just existing near each other. They talked about normal things: food, music, the weather in Chicago. And when Lucas made her laugh so hard she nearly dropped her coffee, he realized he didn't want to go back to the version of himself who hired her for a stunt. He didn't want this to be fake anymore. That night, a small after-party was held at one of the rooftop lounges in town. A few wedding guests showed up, including Isabel and Thomas, but the atmosphere was far more relaxed. Lucas had just stepped away to grab drinks when someone clapped him on the back. Hard. Man, that went better than planned, huh? It was Ethan Marsh, his college roommate, now a finance exec and longtime friend. Lucas chuckled. What do you mean? Ethan grinned. Come on. The whole hire a date to make your ex jealous thing. Classic Lucas. But dude, I didn't think you'd commit this hard. Lucas's face went still. He glanced to his left. Annie was just a few feet away, frozen mid-step. She'd been walking over when Ethan spoke. She had heard every word. The blood drained from her face. Annie Lucas started panic in his voice. She held up a hand. Don't. People around them kept laughing, drinking, talking, unaware that her world had just tilted. You hired me, she said quietly. Not for company. Not for awkward family drama. It was to get under her skin. It started that way, yes, he admitted. But it changed. I changed. Annie blinked, hurt flashing in her eyes. So everything we shared, the conversations, the moments, those were part of the plan too. No, Lucas stepped forward. It stopped being a plan a long time ago, Annie. I swear to you. She shook her head slowly. You could have told me the truth. I was going to, but you didn't. Her voice cracked. Because deep down, you never thought it mattered. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Because she was right. Annie stepped back. I was starting to believe this was real, Lucas. That you saw me as more than just some tactic. I do, he said, voice low, desperate now. But it was too late. Annie turned and walked away into the night heels, clicking against stone as she disappeared into the crowd. Lucas didn't chase her. He couldn't. Not yet. All he could do was watch and feel the weight of what he'd broken pressed down on his chest, like a stone. The villa felt colder without her. Lucas stood in the doorway of the balcony, staring out at the same sea that had looked so peaceful the day before. Now it just felt endless. The room behind him was quiet, too quiet. The dress Annie had worn to the wedding was still draped over the chair where she'd left it. Her perfume lingered in the air. Her absence lingered even more. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd stayed up replaying everything Ethan had said, everything Annie had heard, and the look on her face, that perfect blend of betrayal and heartbreak. She had believed in something real, and he had let her down in the worst way. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had staged an entire relationship to look strong in front of his ex was now crushed because the woman he never meant to fall for had walked away, and it was his fault. Completely. When Lucas got back to Chicago the next day, the city felt different. The noise, the pace, the skyline, it all felt hollow. He tried texting Annie. No response. He tried calling once. She declined it. He didn't try again. Instead, he started thinking about the things she had told him on their walks. The classes she wanted to take. The projects she dreamed about, volunteer work, community programs, building something that actually mattered. So he showed up quietly. He dropped off books by her favorite authors at her doorstep, no note. He found a local nonprofit she had once mentioned and made a sizable anonymous donation under her name. He even signed up for a weekend community cleanup event she had casually mentioned during their flight, just in case she showed up. She didn't. Still, he kept showing up. He walked the neighborhoods she had once described in detail, trying to see the city the way she saw it. Not through glass office windows and rooftop lounges, but from street level where people held doors open for strangers and stopped to talk to elderly neighbors on the sidewalk. He didn't want to be the version of himself who had hired Annie anymore. He wanted to be someone worthy of the woman she was. 3 weeks passed. Then one rainy afternoon, just as he was leaving the community center, his phone buzzed. It was a text. Just one line. The novel blend. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. If you're still the guy who wants to fix this. Lucas's breath caught. She hadn't blocked him. She hadn't given up. She was giving him a chance. And now it was up to him not to waste it. The next day, Lucas arrived 20 minutes early. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk still glistened beneath the dim light of the street lamps. The novel blend sat quietly on the corner of a tree-lined street in Lincoln Park, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Lucas stood outside for a moment, collecting himself. When he stepped in, the cafe smelled like cinnamon and coffee beans. There was soft jazz playing in the background, and only a few people scattered among the shelves and tables. And then he saw her. Annie was sitting at a small table near the back, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. She looked up just as he walked in, and for a second, neither of them moved. She looked tired, but calm, and beautiful in that effortless way she always had. Lucas walked over slowly. "Hi," he said gently. "Hi," she replied, voice soft but steady. He sat down across from her. There was a pause, thick but not unbearable. "I didn't expect you to show," she said. "I didn't expect you to text." They both smiled faintly. "I've been thinking a lot." Annie started, her eyes never leaving his. "About what happened. About you. About me." Lucas swallowed hard. "I've been thinking too. Every single day." "I know what you did," she added. "The books, the donations, the class you signed up for." He blinked, surprised. "You didn't really think I wouldn't find out, did you?" She said, a small smile tugging at her lips. He exhaled a laugh, more of a release than anything. "I didn't do it to impress you," he said. "I did it because you were right. I needed to change. I wanted to." Annie studied him for a long moment. "You hurt me, Lucas," she said plainly. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to just forget it." "I won't forget it," she replied. "But I believe people can grow. I believe people deserve the chance to prove they're not the worst thing they've ever done." Lucas looked at her, heart pounding. "So what now?" Annie took a breath, then reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. "Now," she said, "we start from the beginning. No games, no fake stories. Just you and me." He looked down at her hand in his, and everything inside him settled. "Hi," he said again, a little smile forming. "I'm Lucas." "Hi, Lucas," she replied, eyes soft. "I'm Annie." 6 months later, the cold Chicago wind had given way to spring. Soft sunlight streamed through the windows of Lucas's new apartment, a smaller space, more modest, more grounded. A second mug of coffee sat on the kitchen counter beside his. Annie was in the next room, humming as she flipped through a book they'd picked up together at the neighborhood bookstore last weekend. Her laugh echoed softly when she read something that made her smile. Lucas leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a moment. There were no scripts anymore, no rehearsals, no pretending. Just a quiet rhythm they had built day by day. Mornings at the cafe down the street. Late-night walks along the river. Sunday afternoons lost in bookstores and farmers markets. And conversations, so many conversations. About everything and nothing. About where they'd been. About where they were going. They hadn't rushed anything. Love had unfolded the way spring does after a long winter, quietly, steadily, without fanfare. Lucas had changed. Not just for her, but for himself. He had stepped away from the noise, the ego, the need to prove something to anyone. Now he was building campaigns that mattered. Supporting local causes. Giving talks to young creatives who reminded him of the person he used to be and the man he wanted to keep becoming. Annie, too, had bloomed. Her freelance business was thriving. She was finally leading the community project she dreamed of, helping under-resourced students get access to tech tools and mentorship. They weren't perfect. They didn't try to be. But they were honest. They were present. They were real. One quiet evening in May, Lucas took Annie back to the place it all began. Not Santorini, not the wedding, but something even more symbolic. The bookstore cafe, the novel blend. They sat at their old table in the corner, sipping coffee and listening to rain tap gently against the window. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small square box. Annie blinked. "Lucas." He smiled softly, setting the box on the table, but didn't open it. "This isn't what you think," he said. Not yet. She tilted her head. I'm not asking for forever tonight, he continued. But I am asking for what comes next. Whatever that looks like for us. Annie looked at the box, then back at him. I thought you said no more grand gestures, she teased. He laughed. This isn't grand. It's hopeful. She opened the box gently. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny charm shaped like an open book. An inscription on the inside read, Chapter 2. Annie smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. She leaned in across the table and whispered, Let's write it together. Lucas took her hand, and just like that, without ceremony or spectacle, a real love began quiet, steady, and more powerful than anything he had ever planned. In the end, what began as a cold, calculated plan to make an ex jealous turned into something unexpectedly real. Lucas hired Annie to play a role, but what he didn't expect was to fall for her heart, her mind, her presence. And when the truth came out, he almost lost her for good. But through reflection, change, and genuine effort, he earned a second chance, not just with her, but with himself. So what's the takeaway here? Sometimes in life we chase appearances, validation, or petty victories. But real connection doesn't come from proving a point. It comes from being honest, being vulnerable, and choosing growth over ego. How can we apply this today? Ask yourself, are you showing up for others with sincerity, or are you performing a version of yourself to impress, to win, to not look weak? Because the people who matter most, they don't need perfection. They need you to be real. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in Annie's place? Could you forgive someone who started with a lie but grew into love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion might inspire someone else. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Your support keeps us going and helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care of your heart.